My fiancée said she was too sick to talk. I found her passed out on a couch, while 3 guys argued about who should carry her upstairs. When one of them said my name like a joke, So this happened 3 weeks ago, and I still wake up every morning thinking it was some kind of fever dream. I'm writing this because my therapist says getting it all out might help, and honestly, I need people to tell me I'm not insane for what I did next. My fiancée Valerie and I had been together for 4 years. We got engaged last Christmas, and the wedding was supposed to be in 2 months. Everything seemed perfect. We had the venue booked, deposits paid, invitations sent. She worked in marketing and traveled sometimes for conferences. I'm in software development, so I work from home most days. We had this comfortable routine where we'd text throughout the day and call each other every night when she was away. Last Tuesday, she told me she was coming down with something. She sounded congested on the phone and said her head was killing her. I offered to come over with soup and medicine, but she insisted she just needed to sleep it off. Wednesday, she texted that it had gotten worse, and she was basically bedridden with what felt like the flu. Thursday morning, I called her around 10, and she barely whispered that she couldn't talk because her throat was destroyed and she needed to rest. The thing is, we'd been living separately because her lease wasn't up until after the wedding, and it seemed wasteful to break it early. Her apartment was about 20 minutes from my place. We usually saw each other 4 or 5 times a week. Going 3 days without seeing her felt wrong, especially when she was supposedly so sick. Thursday evening around 7, I decided to just go check on her. I grabbed some chicken soup from her favorite place, picked up cold medicine, orange juice, and drove over. I had keys to her apartment, but I always knocked first out of respect. When I got to her door, I knocked 3 times and waited. Nothing. I knocked again louder. Still nothing. My stomach started doing this weird flip, because what if she was really sick and had passed out or something worse? I used my key and pushed the door open. The apartment was dark except for some light coming from the living room. I could hear voices, male voices, and my brain immediately went to the TV being left on. I walked down the hallway calling her name. The voices got clearer, and they weren't coming from a television. When I turned the corner into the living room, I saw 3 guys standing around her couch. Valerie was lying there in jeans and a black top, completely unconscious. Her hair was a mess. There were empty beer bottles on the coffee table, and the whole room smelled like alcohol and cigarettes. None of the 3 men had noticed me yet because they were too busy arguing with each other. The first guy was tall and athletic-looking with a beard. He was saying something about how they should just leave her there to sleep it off. The second guy was shorter with glasses, and he kept insisting someone needed to get her to bed properly. The third guy was checking his phone and seemed annoyed with both of them. Then the shorter guy with glasses said something that made my blood turn to ice. He said they should call me to come get her because this was getting ridiculous. The tall guy laughed and said, "Why would they call me?" Then he said my name, Ben, like it was the punchline to a joke. He said something about how I probably thought she was home watching Netflix and taking cold medicine. I must have made a sound because all 3 of them spun around and saw me standing there holding a bag of soup and medicine like the world's biggest idiot. The room went completely silent. The tall guy's face went pale. The one with glasses actually took a step backward. The third guy just stared at me with his mouth open. I asked who they were and what they were doing in my fiancée's apartment. My voice sounded strange and distant like it was coming from somewhere else. The tall guy, whose name turned out to be Greg, started stammering something about how they were just friends and Valerie had invited them over. I looked at Valerie still passed out on the couch and asked what kind of friends let someone get this drunk. Keith, the one who had been on his phone, said she'd been fine an hour ago and they didn't realize how much she'd had. Tyler with the glasses kept saying they were about to call someone. I asked why her phone had told me she was too sick to talk if she was having people over to drink. Nobody had an answer for that. I walked over to the couch and tried to wake Valerie up. She was completely out. I could smell vodka on her breath mixed with something sweet. There was no congestion, no fever, nothing that suggested she'd been sick at all. I turned back to the 3 of them and asked how long this had been going on. Greg tried to play dumb, but Tyler cut him off and said they'd been hanging out with Valerie for a few months. He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I asked what he meant by hanging out. Keith said they played poker sometimes and just watched movies. The way he said it made it obvious there was more to the story. I picked up Valerie's phone from the coffee table. She never locked it around me because we had this trust thing where we didn't hide our phones from each other. Except apparently that was one-sided. I opened her messages and started scrolling. There were group chats I'd never seen before. Individual conversations with all 3 of these guys that went back months. Messages about meeting up, inside jokes, plans to grab dinner. What really got me was finding a conversation from that morning where Greg had asked if she was still coming over tonight, and she'd responded with a thumbs up and said she told me she was sick, so she was free all evening. Tyler had responded with a laughing emoji. Keith had written something about how I must be clueless. I held up the phone and asked if they wanted to explain this. Greg started talking fast about how it wasn't what it looked like, and Valerie had told them our relationship was complicated. Tyler said she'd mentioned we were having problems. Keith stayed quiet, but he was watching the door like he wanted to bolt. The thing is, we weren't having problems. At least I didn't think we were. We just finalized the catering for the wedding. Her parents had just sent us a check for the rehearsal dinner. 2 weeks ago, we'd spent an entire Sunday looking at honeymoon packages for Greece. Nothing about our relationship seemed complicated to me. I found more messages. Valerie complaining about me to these guys, saying I was controlling and always checking up on her, calling me paranoid when I asked about her day. There were deleted message notifications that made me realize she'd been covering her tracks. I scrolled back further and found receipts she'd sent in a chat. Dinners at expensive restaurants. Tickets to concerts. A hotel charge from 2 weeks ago when she'd told me she was at a work conference in Denver. I looked up from the phone and asked which one of them had been to Denver with her. Nobody answered, but Tyler's face gave it away. He actually looked guilty. I asked if they knew we were engaged. Greg said yes, but Valerie had told them it was basically over, and we were just going through the motions until she figured out how to end it. That's when something inside me just snapped in a weird, calm way. I wasn't yelling or throwing things. I just stood there doing the math in my head. For years together. Thousands of dollars spent on wedding planning. My parents flying in from across the country in 2 months. Her sister who was supposed to be maid of honor. All of it built on what was apparently a complete lie. Valerie started stirring on the couch. She made this groaning sound, and her eyes fluttered open. She looked around confused, and then she saw me. For a second, she seemed like she might try to play it off, but then she saw the 3 guys standing there looking guilty, and my face and the phone in my hand. She knew immediately that I knew everything. Valerie sat up way too fast, and immediately grabbed her head. She looked at me, and then at the guys, and her face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. She tried to say something, but it came out slurred and confused. She asked what I was doing there, and why was I holding her phone. I told her I came to check on my sick fiancé. I put extra emphasis on the word sick. She blinked a few times like she was trying to remember what lie she'd told me. Then she said she was sick earlier, but felt better, so she invited some friends over. Her words were running together, and she kept losing her train of thought mid-sentence. She said something about how I was overreacting, and this wasn't what it looked like. I asked her to explain exactly what it looked like to her, because from where I stood it looked like she'd faked being sick to get drunk with 3 guys she'd been hiding from me for months. She tried to stand up, but her legs weren't cooperating. Greg moved to help her, but I told him not to touch her. The way I said it made him back off immediately. Valerie started crying and saying I was being crazy and controlling just like she'd told them. She actually pointed at the guys when she said that. Tyler looked at the floor. Keith was still eyeing the door. Greg at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. She said I was always checking up on her and never gave her space, and she just needed friends. I pulled up the messages on her phone and started reading them out loud. The one where she called me paranoid for asking who she was texting. The one where she told Greg I monitored her location. The one where she complained to Tyler that I questioned every time she went out. Except none of that was true. I'd never asked to see her location. I'd never questioned her going out. I'd never monitored anything because I trusted her. Greg shifted his weight and said something under his breath. I asked him to repeat it. He said Valerie had told them I made her check in constantly and got angry if she didn't respond to texts immediately. I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to me. I told him to check the message history. I asked him to find even one example of me demanding she check in. He couldn't because it didn't exist. That's when Tyler made a mistake. He said something about how every Tuesday Valerie came to their poker game, and she'd mentioned I thought she was at yoga class. I turned to Valerie and asked about yoga class. She'd been telling me for 6 months that she went to yoga every Tuesday evening. She even bought a yoga mat and kept it in her car. She'd talk about the poses they'd learned and the instructor whose name was apparently Jennifer. Valerie started talking faster, trying to explain. She said the poker thing was just something that happened a few times. Tyler interrupted and said she'd been coming every single Tuesday since September. Greg told him to shut up, but the damage was done. I did the math. September to now was almost 5 months. 20 Tuesdays minimum. 20 times she'd lied directly to my face and then come home and told me elaborate stories about yoga class. I walked over to her purse sitting on the kitchen counter. She yelled at me not to go through her stuff, but I ignored her. Inside I found receipts. So many receipts. Dinner at a steakhouse downtown that cost $300. Drinks at a rooftop bar. Concert tickets. A hotel charge from the Riverside Plaza dated 3 weeks ago. Another hotel charge from a place called the Summit Lodge in Denver from the conference she'd supposedly attended alone. I held up the Denver receipt and asked Tyler if this looked familiar. He didn't answer, but his face said everything. Valerie was crying harder, now saying I had no right to go through her personal things. I reminded her we were engaged and planning to share everything legally in 2 months. I asked if she was planning to keep separate bank accounts for her secret life after we got married. The front door opened, and everyone froze. A woman walked in holding a bottle of wine. She was maybe 25 with red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She saw all of us and stopped. She looked at Tyler and asked what was going on. Tyler's face went completely white. The woman looked at Valerie on the couch, and then at me, and asked if everything was okay. I asked who she was. She said her name was Ashley, and she was Tyler's girlfriend. Then she looked at Tyler and asked why he hadn't told her there was a party. Tyler started stammering something, but I cut him off. I asked Ashley how long she and Tyler had been together. She said 8 months. I asked if she knew Tyler was spending time with Valerie. She said yes, they were all friends. I asked if she knew Valerie was engaged. Ashley's face changed. She said no, she thought Valerie was single. She looked at Tyler and asked what was happening. Tyler tried to explain, but nothing he said made sense. Ashley kept asking why Valerie never mentioned having a fiancé. She said they'd had multiple girls' nights where Valerie talked about dating and never once mentioned being in a serious relationship. Valerie tried to stand up again, and this time she managed it by holding onto the couch arm. She told Ashley this was a misunderstanding. Ashley asked her directly if she was engaged. Valerie looked at me and then at Ashley and said it was complicated. Ashley asked what was complicated about being engaged. Either you were or you weren't. I held up Valerie's left hand showing the ring. Ashley's mouth fell open. She turned to Tyler and asked if he knew. Tyler said Valerie told him she was ending things with me. Ashley asked when. Tyler couldn't answer. Ashley asked if Valerie had mentioned being engaged on any of the Tuesday poker nights. Tyler said no. That's when Keith finally spoke up. He asked what girls' nights Ashley was talking about. Ashley said she and Valerie had dinner every Thursday. Keith's expression changed completely. He said Valerie told him Thursday was her standing dinner date with her sister. I actually laughed at that because Valerie's sister lived in Portland, and we'd just been on the phone with her 2 days ago. Ashley pulled out her phone and showed us pictures. Her and Valerie at restaurants. At a wine bar. At someone's apartment party. All of these were supposedly nights when Valerie had told me she was working late or meeting her sister or doing various other normal relationship things. The pictures went back months. Greg asked how many other people Valerie was hanging out with. It was a valid question. If there were Tuesday poker nights and Thursday dinners with Ashley, and these 3 guys who knew what else was happening on the other nights. I opened Valerie's calendar app on her phone. It was color-coded. Blue entries matched what she'd told me. Red entries were what she was actually doing. There were red entries almost every single day. I scrolled through and read them out loud. Wine tasting with Kevin. Concert with the Harbor Street crew. Weekend trip to the coast with the marketing group. Except I'd met her marketing colleagues at the holiday party, and none of them matched the names in these entries. Valerie tried to grab the phone from me, but she was too unsteady, and I stepped back. Ashley was now scrolling through her own phone. She pulled up text messages between her and Valerie. She showed Tyler messages where Valerie had asked advice about guys she was interested in, asked what she should wear on first dates, complained about men who moved too fast. Tyler looked like he might be sick. Keith asked Ashley if Valerie had ever mentioned him. Ashley scrolled some more and said yes. There was a Keith who Valerie had gone hiking with a few times. Keith said they'd gone hiking 6 or 7 times over the past 2 months. I remembered those Saturdays. Valerie had told me she was doing sunrise hikes with a women's outdoor group she'd joined. I sat down in the armchair across from the couch because my legs felt weird. Valerie was still crying and trying to form sentences, but nothing coherent was coming out. Greg said they should probably all leave. Ashley said she wasn't going anywhere until someone explained what was happening. Tyler tried to put his hand on her shoulder, and she shrugged him off. I asked Valerie how much of our relationship was real. She said all of it was real, and she loved me. I asked if she loved me why she'd built this entire separate life. She said she just wanted to have friends, and I made it hard for her to have a social life. I pointed out that I'd never once told her she couldn't have friends. She said I made her feel guilty. I asked for a single example. She couldn't provide one. The truth was becoming clear to everyone in that room. Valerie hadn't been maintaining friendships. She'd been maintaining multiple versions of herself with different groups of people who didn't know about each other. We were all pieces of something bigger that none of us had seen. Keith's phone rang, and he pulled it out of his pocket looking grateful for the distraction. He glanced at the screen, and his face did something weird. He looked at Valerie, and then at his phone again. Ashley asked if he was going to answer it. He stepped toward the hallway, but I told him to answer it right there. Something about his expression made me want to hear this conversation. He hesitated, and then answered on speaker, probably figuring it was safer than looking suspicious. A male voice came through asking if Valerie had made it home okay. The guy said he'd been texting her all evening, and she wasn't responding. He asked Keith if she was still mad about the argument they'd had on Sunday night before she left. The room went dead silent. Keith's hand was shaking holding the phone. The voice kept talking, saying he understood if Valerie needed space, but could Keith at least confirm she got back safely from their weekend trip? He said something about how the cabin had been a disaster with the heat going out, but at least they'd made the most of it. Keith ended the call without saying anything. He looked at Valerie and asked what weekend trip. Valerie's face had gone from red and blotchy to completely white. She said it was nothing, and Keith didn't understand the situation. Keith said the situation seemed pretty clear and asked who the hell was on the phone. She said it was complicated. That word again. I asked Keith when this weekend trip supposedly happened. He said he didn't know anything about a trip. Tyler said last weekend Valerie had told him she was visiting her parents. Greg said she'd told him she had a work emergency in Phoenix. Ashley said Valerie had canceled their Thursday dinner last week, claiming she had food poisoning. I remembered last weekend clearly. Valerie had called me Friday afternoon saying her boss needed her to fly to Phoenix immediately for a client crisis. She'd sent me pictures from the airport, sent me a photo of her hotel room, texted me Saturday morning about how boring the meetings were, called me Sunday evening from what she said was the Phoenix airport saying her flight was delayed. I asked Valerie where her laptop was. She said it was in her bedroom, and I had no right to go through it. I was already walking toward her bedroom. She tried to follow me, but she was still too drunk and unsteady. Ashley actually helped her sit back down, which felt surreal given that Ashley had just discovered her boyfriend had been lied to as well. The laptop was on her bed, plugged and charging. I opened it, and thankfully she'd stayed logged in. I went straight to her email. I searched for flight confirmations. There were dozens of them. Flights to Denver, Seattle, Portland, San Diego, Phoenix, Chicago. I cross-referenced the dates with my memory. Every single one corresponded to a time she'd told me she was traveling for work or visiting family or attending conferences. I opened the Denver confirmation from a month ago. 2 tickets. One for Valerie and one for Tyler Morrison. The hotel booking showed a king bed suite for 3 nights. I walked back to the living room holding the laptop. Tyler saw his name on the screen, and his whole body seemed to collapse inward. Ashley made a sound like she'd been punched. I kept clicking through. Seattle trip with someone named Warren Phillips. Portland trip with Keith Davidson. That was Keith's last name based on the email address visible. San Diego with Greg Chun. Chicago with someone named Troy Bannister. Phoenix last weekend with a William Cross. Each trip had hotel bookings. Each hotel booking showed romantic packages. Couples massages. Champagne turn-down service. Late checkouts. Greg asked if that was his name on the San Diego booking. I turned the laptop around. He saw the confirmation for 2 weeks ago when Valerie had told me she was at her college roommate's wedding. The hotel was the Seaside Grand. The booking included a sunset dinner cruise. Greg had gone completely pale. He said Valerie told him I was her ex-boyfriend who she'd broken up with months ago. Tyler said Valerie told him the same thing, that I was her ex who wouldn't accept it was over. Keith said she'd told him we were separated and going through a difficult divorce. The 3 of them looked at each other, and you could see them all realizing they'd been played. Ashley asked Tyler directly if he and Valerie had slept together. Tyler couldn't look at her. That was answer enough. I found Valerie's credit card statements in her email. She'd been using different cards for different activities. One card for things with me that looked legitimate. Another card for everything else. The everything else card had charges that made my stomach hurt. Hotels, restaurants, shopping trips, flights, rental cars. Thousands of dollars every month. Then I noticed something that made my blood go cold. Some of the charges were on a card I recognized. Our joint credit card that we'd gotten for wedding expenses. I pulled out my phone and logged into the account. The recent charges made no sense. $1,000 at a jewelry store when I hadn't bought jewelry. $800 at a restaurant in Seattle when I'd been home that weekend. $600 at a spa in San Diego. Valerie had been using our joint wedding fund to pay for her trips with other men. Money that my parents had contributed to. Money her parents had put in. Money we'd both been saving. I checked the balance. We should have had close to $30,000 saved for the wedding. The account showed $6,000. I asked Valerie where $24,000 went. She was crying so hard now she couldn't speak. I showed everyone the statement on my phone. Ashley gasped. Greg swore under his breath. Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Keith asked if Valerie had stolen from me. I said apparently she had stolen from both of us and from our families. Ashley said we should call the police. Valerie suddenly became more coherent and begged us not to. She said she would pay it all back. She said she had a problem and needed help. She said she'd been confused and making bad decisions. None of it explained $24,000 spent on romantic getaways with multiple men while planning a wedding to someone else. I asked Keith to call his friend back. Keith said absolutely not. I said we needed to know how many other people there were. Keith reluctantly called the number. The guy answered immediately, and Keith put it on speaker again. Keith asked how long he and Valerie had been seeing each other. The voice said about 4 months. Asked why. Keith said he was doing an inventory and hung up. For months with William. The Denver guy Tyler had been at least a month based on the booking. Keith said he and Valerie had been dating since October. Greg said he'd been seeing her since September. I'd been with her for 4 years and engaged for 13 months. Ashley pulled up the building's tenant portal on her phone. She said if Valerie had been bringing all these men here, there would be security footage. The building had cameras at every entrance. Valerie tried to say that was an invasion of privacy, but Ashley ignored her. She logged into the system using Tyler's account since he'd been here enough that Valerie had added him as a guest. We scrolled through footage from the past month. There was Valerie entering with Greg on a Tuesday afternoon when she'd told me she was working late. Valerie with Keith on a Saturday morning when she'd told me she was at yoga. Valerie with Tyler on a Wednesday evening when she'd told me her car was in the shop. Valerie with 3 different men I didn't recognize across various days and times. The footage showed something else too. Days when I'd been traveling for work conferences. I'd gone to Austin in November for a week. The security footage showed Valerie had brought someone different to her apartment 4 nights that week. A different man each night. I'd called her every one of those nights, and she'd answered telling me about her quiet evening at home watching television. Greg said he thought he was her boyfriend. Tyler said the same thing. Keith said Valerie had told him they were exclusive. All 3 of them had believed they were in actual relationships with her. All 3 had been lied to just like me, but across shorter timelines. I asked Valerie how many men there were total. She wouldn't answer. I asked if she even knew. She put her face in her hands. Ashley asked the question differently. She asked how many men Valerie was currently sleeping with. Valerie whispered something we couldn't hear. Ashley asked her to repeat it. Valerie said she didn't know exactly. That answer hung in the air, and nobody knew what to say next. Someone started pounding on the door. Heavy aggressive knocking that made everyone jump. Greg went to check and came back saying it was building security and someone had called about a noise complaint. Ashley said she'd call the actual police because this had gone way beyond a personal matter. Valerie begged her not to, but Ashley was already dialing. 2 security guards came in first. They assessed the situation and saw a bunch of people standing around with one very drunk woman on the couch, surrounded by evidence of something clearly wrong. One of them asked if everyone was safe. I said physically yes, but I needed them to stay because the police were coming and I wanted witnesses to everything in this apartment. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers who looked tired and probably weren't expecting whatever this situation was. They separated everyone and started taking statements. I showed them the laptop with the flight confirmations. Showed them the credit card statements with our joint account. Showed them the security footage Ashley had pulled up showing different men coming and going. One officer asked Valerie if she'd used my credit card without permission. Valerie said it was a joint account, so she had permission. I explained it was joint specifically for wedding expenses, and she'd spent $24,000 on trips with other men. The officer asked if I had documentation of the account's intended purpose. I pulled up emails between us and our families discussing contributions specifically for the wedding. The second officer was talking to Greg, Tyler, and Keith separately. I could hear fragments of their statements, each one explaining how long they'd known Valerie and what she'd told them about her relationship status. Tyler was explaining about the Denver trip. Keith was showing text messages on his phone. Greg kept saying he had no idea she was engaged until tonight. My phone rang. It was my best friend Calvin, who I'd texted earlier when I first got to the apartment. I'd sent him a message saying something was wrong and I might need backup. He'd been calling repeatedly, and I'd ignored it while everything unfolded. I answered, and he said he was downstairs with a lawyer friend named Patricia who worked in family law. I told him to come up. Calvin took one look at the scene and his lawyer instincts kicked, and even though Patricia was the actual attorney, she started asking me questions rapid fire. How long had we been engaged? Was the credit card in both names? Did I have proof of the intended use? Did I have documentation of contributions from family members? I answered everything while she took notes on her phone. Patricia talked to the police officers. She explained that this appeared to be a case of theft by deception and fraudulent use of funds. The officers said they'd need to file a full report and recommended I go to the station tomorrow to press formal charges. One officer said based on the amount involved this could be felony theft depending on how the prosecutor wanted to handle it. Valerie heard the word felony and started hyperventilating. She kept saying she would pay everything back. Patricia asked her if she had $24,000 available. Valerie said she could get it. Patricia asked how. Valerie had no answer. Patricia told the officers that seemed like an admission that the funds weren't available, which suggested the money had been spent on the trips we'd documented. Ashley was still scrolling through security footage. She called everyone over. The footage showed from 3 weeks ago on a Sunday afternoon. Valerie and a man I didn't recognize entering the building. They went up to her apartment. 2 hours later they came down and got in a car together. Ashley fast-forwarded to later that night. Valerie returned alone around midnight, carrying what looked like a duffel bag. I remembered that Sunday. Valerie had told me she was spending the day with her mother shopping for wedding decorations. She'd called me that evening saying she was exhausted and going straight to bed. She'd sent me photos of flower arrangements and centerpiece options throughout the day. I'd looked at those photos and helped her choose. Those photos had apparently been taken at some other time and sent to me while she was with another man. The apartment door opened again and Valerie's parents walked in. Her mother took one look at the police officers and the crowd of people and asked what on earth was happening. Valerie's father saw his daughter crying on the couch and immediately went into protective mode, demanding to know why police were there. I explained as calmly as I could. Valerie had been lying about being sick. She'd been seeing multiple men. She'd spent our wedding fund on trips with these men. Her parents needed to hear this from me because their daughter wasn't capable of coherent explanation at this point. Valerie's mother sat down heavily on the arm of the couch. Her father's face went through several emotions before settling on something like resignation. Her father said this wasn't the first time. Everyone turned to look at him. He said Valerie had done something similar in her previous relationship before she'd met me. The guy's name was David, and he'd been her fiancé too. She'd been caught with multiple men and a secret credit card with $50,000 in charges. David had called off that wedding 6 years ago. Her parents had paid David back to avoid legal issues and made Valerie promise to get therapy. I asked why nobody told me this. Her mother said Valerie swore she'd changed and been going to therapy. They thought the past was the past and didn't want to poison a new relationship. Her father said they should have told me, and he was sorry. He asked how much she'd taken this time. When I said $24,000, he closed his eyes and swore quietly. Patricia asked if Valerie's parents would be willing to make a statement about the previous incident. Her father said absolutely. He pulled out his phone and showed old emails between him and David. Emails discussing repayment plans. Emails from a therapist Valerie had supposedly been seeing. Her father said the therapist had diagnosed her with something related to compulsive lying and attention-seeking, but Valerie had stopped going after 3 sessions. One of the police officers asked Valerie directly how many people she was currently in relationships with. Valerie said she didn't think of them as relationships. The officer asked what she would call them then. Valerie said she just liked the attention and the excitement and didn't think about consequences. The officer wrote that down. Calvin pulled me aside and asked what I wanted to do. The question felt enormous. What did I want to do? I had a wedding in 2 months that was clearly not happening. I had family who'd contributed money that was gone. I had 4 years invested in someone who turned out to be a complete stranger. I told him I wanted her held accountable for the theft at minimum. Patricia said I could file a civil suit for the money regardless of whether criminal charges stuck. She said with documentation and witness statements, I had a strong case. She also said I should immediately remove Valerie from any joint accounts and cancel all shared credit cards. She said I should document everything in the apartment tonight, while police were present in case Valerie tried to claim anything was jointly purchased. I started taking photos of everything. The receipts in her purse. The laptop screen showing flight confirmations. The credit card statements. The security footage on Ashley's phone. Every piece of evidence that this had happened and wasn't some nightmare I could wake up from. The officers finished their reports and said someone would contact me about next steps. They told Valerie not to leave town and that charges would likely be filed within the week. Her parents said they'd take her home with them. Her father apologized again and said they'd figure out repayment, but it might take time. Patricia gave them her card and said all communication should go through her. Everyone slowly filtered out. Greg, Tyler, and Keith left together looking shell-shocked. Ashley left separately after telling Tyler they were done and she'd get her stuff from his place tomorrow. Calvin and Patricia stayed while I gathered anything of mine from the apartment. Turned out there wasn't much because I'd never really spent time there. The wedding was canceled. I had to call the venue, the caterer, the photographer. Had to tell my parents and her parents had to tell their side. Had to return gifts that had already arrived. The deposit money was mostly gone because canceling this late meant penalties, but losing a few thousand more didn't seem to matter compared to $24,000. Criminal charges were filed 2 weeks later. Valerie was charged with felony theft and fraud. Her lawyer tried to negotiate, but Patricia pushed back hard with all the documentation. The case is still ongoing, but the prosecutor seems confident. Her parents did pay back $8,000, which was apparently all they could manage. The rest will depend on what the court orders if she's convicted. I found out through mutual friends that Valerie had been planning something worse. One of the guys I didn't know came forward after hearing about the charges. He said Valerie had told him she was planning to leave the country after the wedding. She'd apparently been collecting cash and had opened accounts I didn't know about. The theory is she was going to go through with the wedding, collect all the gift money, and disappear. I'm still dealing with the financial mess. Still dealing with the fact that someone I loved and trusted was capable of this level of deception. still explaining to people why there's no wedding. The therapy helps, but some days are harder than others. Valerie tried to contact me once through a mutual friend saying she was sorry and wanted to explain. I didn't respond. There's nothing she could say that would make any of this make sense. Some people are just wired differently, and you can't see it until it's too late. That's my story. That's what happened when I found my supposedly sick fiancée passed out while 3 guys argued about carrying her upstairs.